Thank you guys all for joining. I know like maybe a few more people will trickling in during the event, but we just wanted to get started. So my name is Embry. I am the Director of Research for the Harvard Alumni for Mental Health Group. And this event is part of the advocacy series, which was started to help destigmatize conversations surrounding mental illness, mental health, and having members of our community and members within and outside of the Harvard community to come and speak about their personal experiences with mental health, and the ways that they've coped and the way that they've learned about the conditions that they've dealt with. And so today we are joined by Phil Kaplan, and going to give a brief introduction about Phil. We're really excited to have you today, so thank you for joining us as well. So Phil is a long speaker and volunteer for the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And since 2016, he has shared his personal story of mental health with various audiences, including college students, social workers, pastors, healthcare professionals, and members of law enforcement. Prior to his involvement with NAMI, he practiced law for over 6 years in the child welfare field. And he is passionate about ending the stigma against mental health struggles. And so with that, I will hand it over to you, Phil. So please feel free to take it away.
Thanks, Embry. So first of all, thank you for the introduction. To flesh out a little bit about my background, I'm 43 years old. I live in Annapolis, Maryland, which is about 40 minutes south of Baltimore, Maryland in the United States. And like Embry said, I'm a longtime speaker and volunteer with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which in the United States is the nation's largest grassroots health advocacy organization, which provides peer-based support both for individuals struggling with mental illness and also the family members of such individuals. All of NAMI's groups and programs are peer-run support groups for individuals who suffer mental illness, along with family members, separate support groups for family members, classes, and then finally, public education programs like the one that I'm involved with, which is called In Our Own Voice, which involves trained volunteers who team up to tell their personal story of living with a mental health condition. And we try to reach out specifically to various audiences that have some type of either academic or professional interest in better understanding mental health. I have loved my work with NAMI. And just to also clarify about the specific issue that I'll talk about a lot more in detail, I have dealt with serious depression, with clinical depression, pretty much from my mid-30s and especially intense my mid to late 30s. I am very lucky now that at the age of 43, I'm doing very well in my life. And before I get started on my personal story, I want to emphasize two very important points. One, just to give you some sense of the structure, I'm going to break this down into three components, three segments, so to speak, where I'll talk about some of the worst ways that my mental health issues have affected me, affected my life. I'll talk about that, what my story, my journey has looked like. Then in the second part, I'll talk about all the things that have helped me, the positives, not just treatment, other things in my life that have really been important in a positive way in helping me cope with my mental health issues. And then finally, I will explain where I'm at now in my life. And I will leave with any final words of wisdom that I have in terms of learn from my experiences and what my thoughts are. After each of these parts, I want to make this interactive. So after each of these parts, we'll take about 5 minutes or so, at least 5 minutes, and turn it over to you for any questions that you have. I invite all of you to ask me any questions about anything that you're curious about or that I might have missed, anything that I've shared, want to know more about. I'm an open book. I would not be doing this if I wasn't open to such questions. So I absolutely encourage that. Um, and then finally, the other mention, and this is very important before I get started, is that I want to thank you all. I really want to thank all of you for listening to me, for being willing to listen to my story. I know that it is not easy to listen to someone go into detail about pediatric illness. And I applaud all of you for being willing to listen. And I applaud all of you for your interest in this topic. I absolutely believe this is how we move society forward. And I think as the I guess, summary of what this event would be has said, I will also, in talking about my depression, talking about my mental health issues, I'm going to spend a lot of time focusing on my experiences as a man, which are particularly relevant. The issues of men, male issues, the stigma of men, toxic masculinity, and how those have been to my personal experience. So, with that being said, let me get started. So, I spent over 7 years from my late 20s to my mid 30s as a practicing lawyer in the child welfare field. Specifically, my full-time job was to represent parents in child custody proceedings initiated by the Department of Social Services. In effect, defending parents against allegations of abuse or neglect or some kind of other child welfare safety issue. Obviously, a very intense, emotionally difficult job, but one that I'm proud to say I did pretty well. I was well respected among judges and other attorneys. Um, had very good friends, good social life. Outside of work, I volunteered as one of the scorers and presiding judges for regional high school mock trial competitions, as well as an appellate moot court judge for law students. And so it's life that, looking at it from the outside, if you had seen me or looked at my life superficially, it probably seemed like I had it all together or I was pretty well. I was outwardly successful. And in many ways, I was. Underneath the surface, I was deeply unhappy. And the outward success masked a lot of pain. In my early 30s, I had broken up with a longtime girlfriend. Was struggling to date. It was not going well. I was very lonely. I was trying to meet someone. Went through online dating. I won't mention any sites by name. They're the usual mainstream dating sites we all know and love. Uh, Tried other methods, other, just social meetups, activities, everything you can think of. And dating was just absolutely horrible. Now, I emphasize this point because I want to go into territory that a lot of guys do not want to talk about, which is dating and romantic loneliness. But I'll say outright that it was romantic loneliness and dating struggle, dating frustration more than anything else that was the biggest contributing factor to my depression, to the depression that became more and more intense in my mid 30s. Guys, don't like to talk about this because as guys are told, we just have to figure it out. We have to go out and just make it happen, find a way to approach, find a way to ask a woman out. Uh, and I gotta say that there's something seriously wrong with the 21st century dating culture, and not enough guys talk about it. Guys, unfortunately, have a tendency many times to laugh it off, especially when it comes to dating or relationship frustration, loneliness. We tend to minimize it. We tend to joke about it. We tend to pretend that it doesn't bother us that much. But it did bother me. I could not figure it out. I could figure out why it was so difficult to get dates, why it was so difficult, why I kept getting rejected. I It seemed an incomprehensible maze. Now, as guys, we're given two very conflicting messages. And I point the finger here, I point the finger at toxic masculinity that tells men that we are supposed to be so confident and strong and outwardly tough about this, and we're never supposed to let on that anything bothers us. And that here we are in this very confusing dating culture where on the one hand, men are told you got to go out, you got to make it happen, you got to be the one to approach, you got to be a man, all of that stuff, all those messages. And then on the other hand, at the same time, guys are very much aware of all the talk and the complaints and the condemnation of the guys who do everything wrong, who are creepy, who are inappropriate, who are sexually harassing. We see, we hear about the Me Too movement. We hear about, the all the guys and the unwelcome advances, and we're trying to figure this out, and it's incomprehensible, and it doesn't make sense because any decent guy doesn't want to be in that group, doesn't want to be a guy who approaches in the wrong way and is unwelcome or seen as creepy or aggressive. And yet, we're never allowed to say that we're afraid of that. Whenever we do, we're told, be a man and just find a way to make it work. And I couldn't. My frustration grew. I was angry. I didn't understand why dating was this difficult. But more than being angry, because it's so easy for us guys to be angry and to express anger. It's the one negative emotion we're told is okay. There was something deeper. I was hurt and I was scared because it is frightening to be very lonely and to not have any answer about how to make it different. Here I was, and as I was trying to date, as I was trying to do these things and figure it out, my unhappiness was worsening. And at a certain point, and this is a point somewhere in my middies, my unhappiness seemed to cross a line that separates regular, normal unhappiness about something and clinical depression. And it's sometimes a hard line to figure out. The way that I experienced it was I began having trouble functioning at work. It began to affect my work life. I felt like I just couldn't continue to make it through the day and show up every day and do what I'm doing. I felt a deeper sadness, a deeper sense of despair about my life situation. If I could sum up in one simple phrase what I felt about my life at this time, that phrase would be buyer's remorse. I felt a sense of buyer's remorse for the life that I had made for myself. Like, what did I do all this for? when I was so lonely and not happy. As my depression worsened, I got to the point, I was a few months shy of 36. It was September 2014. I quit my job because I just couldn't take it anymore. And as a result of the way that my depression has affected me, I have not been part of the workforce since September 2014, not practicing law, not having any job. And I'm very fortunate, I'll talk about this more in the next segment, that I ultimately pursued a case for long-term disability and won, and that I also have my mother's financial support. A very good relationship with my mother. She lives out of state, but has been able to, very fortunately, send me enough money so that her support, along with my disability case, my disability payments, allow me to be okay financially. But obviously, this is not a place where I thought I would be when I decided to pursue a legal career. So those are some of the worst ways that my depression has affected me, has changed my life. And I want to stop now, end this first segment, and also let you know this was the hardest segment to get through. It only gets better from here. But I want to give you all a few minutes to ask me any questions that you have so far about anything that I shared, or any questions you have about my experiences. I'll take a few minutes for questions.
Can I ask a question? Is it going to be
Yep.
verbal?
We can hear
Yep.
you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Kaplan. The part I really like most is when you transitioned from sadness and unhappiness where you couldn't function. I really like, because that's always the question. At what point do we know that we are really depressed, that we are clinically depressed? So I take it that that was the point where you really started to recognize that something is seriously wrong, right? And then was when your functioning became impaired and you had to leave your job, right?
Yes.
Okay,
And
yeah.
actually, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, go on.
Just to clarify a little more, about a year before I quit my job, I began using FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, which is a law in the US where I was able to shorten my work hours every day and use my paid sick leave to shorten my work hour with, documentation from a therapist. And I did that about a year or so prior to leaving. And so that was the first big signal that something was, my functioning was impaired. And then the next major signal, the next major thing was just leaving my job. So yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'd like to ask you a question. First of all, thanks for your story and speaking to us. You're also a very good speaker. At this juncture, I'm curious, were you in any kind of treatment, any kind of psychotherapy, or taking any kind of antidepressants or anything like that at that time? And if you got any kind of, and I assume it's part of the next phase of your story, but at this point, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, and I definitely, that's a great question. I will definitely go into more detail about in the next segment when I talk about the things that have helped me. I predominantly saw a licensed professional counselor for talk therapy. I did not take medication. I felt that, well, for a number of reasons. And one of the main reasons that I've avoided medication, and unfortunately there's not enough time to really go into detail about this, but I had also struggled with depression as a teenager, was treated for it as a teenager with meds, and did not react well to them. So I've avoided any treatment with medication as an adult. And also because I felt like my depression was mostly about life issues, and that, and less about thing physiologically wrong with my brain or brain chemistry. That's how I experienced it. So my main mode of treatment was psychotherapy. Yep.
Yeah, I was going to ask, in a society with values and looks up to education, career progress, and wealth, it can take a big hit on self-esteem to be disabled. And maybe in the next segment, you will talk about how you cope with that and how you see yourself in that regard.
Absolutely. That's definitely, I think, one of the most significant issues, and I'll definitely be getting into that in the next segment.
I have a question. I'm wondering, were you in contact with anyone at your work, your place of work, like while you were like coming to the decision to eventually or ultimately like end your work there? Or was this just like a decision you came to on your own and was like no one aware? Like what was the atmosphere like, I guess?
In my specific place of employment, it was pretty official. I told my supervisor that I was having some mental health struggles, and I think because of privacy laws and just other bureaucratic issues, my old employer was a fairly large government agency which had its own HR department, and it kind of had to go through all the bureaucratic channels. So and I really wasn't that close to my old supervisor, so there wasn't too much talk of that. There was more talk with colleagues, with friends who were attorneys who knew me more personally, that I talked to, and I was kind of talking to them as it was happening. Any other? Oh, I see a comment in the chat. Very good question. Actually, let me just read it. Just wanted to thank you for your courage to be so open and talking about this issue. I appreciate you talking about how toxic masculinity affected you. Was the specific triggering event that pushed you into clinical depression, or was it a gradual process? Very good question. It was ultimately a gradual process. There was nothing specific. I can't ice it that way. I can't say, oh, because of this particular thing that happened, that I was, pushed into depression. It was more the aggregate of everything going on at that time and the way it affected me. Very good question. Any last questions before I head to the second segment? Other questions, we'll also have some time at the end. Okay, so now let me start on the second segment, which is what helps and what has helped me, both in terms of treatment and in terms of other things in my life that have been important. And let me talk about all of this in two ways. One, the first thing that has really been really helpful as in the most general way has been accepting the limitations created by my mental health issues. And the second thing that has been enormously helpful has been being able to take advantage of resources available to me. Both of these have been so critical in allowing me to cope, and to not only cope, but to really have a good life, even in the face of all the pain and disruption depression has caused. So let me talk about that first part, being able to accept the limitations that my depression has caused. So one of the most significant things I did have to come to terms with was the issue, the more personal and I think very male-based issue of going from someone who too much judged my self-worth by career status, who was very proud of his career achievements, his academic and professional accomplishments, being a lawyer, being a courtroom litigator, winning cases, winning trials, having the respect of judges, and thinking of myself as a lawyer, and thinking of myself as not only a lawyer, but a lawyer who is going to have a lifelong legal career, who's going to continue to be a successful lawyer and perhaps become more successful, and who had that vision of my life, and then had to deal with not only not being a lawyer, but being long-term unemployed with no end in sight, and then being officially disabled. I've had to deal with that. And, at a certain point, my greatest victory has been being able to accept that without beating myself up, being able to say, okay, being a lawyer was a great life and identity in a lot of ways. I'm proud of it, but it's not me anymore, and it doesn't have to be. In this way, faith really helped. Became a Christian after actually a lifelong, after being a lifelong non-believer in the summer of 2016. I was 37, and I know this can be a very, high voltage area of discussion. So I want to simplify it as much as possible, because I definitely don't want to come across like I'm evangelizing. I'm only going to summarize it this way. Being able to turn things over to God, being able to believe in God and have faith in God allowed me to understand that I didn't have to have all the answers. And I think this was critical as a way to protect myself from toxic masculinity, and in a way to escape from toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity says your career, you are how outwardly successful you are, and if you can't be that, you're a loser. And I had to extricate myself from that and say, no, I don't believe that anymore. I don't subscribe anymore. And no matter what's happening with me, I have worth. I have worth in the sight of God. I have worth to myself. I have worth to the world, regardless of being out of work or even disabled long-term from working. So that was what has been really helpful, being able to accept with faith the limitations imposed by my depression. The second part of this is, which goes along with it, is being able to take advantage of the opportunities and resources available. Pursuing a disability case, which I'll admit took me a while. When I left my job, September 2014, it took me 2.5 years from the time I left my job to the time that I chose to initiate, with the help of a lawyer that I found, to initiate a case for long-term disability, for SSDI, which call it in the US. it took me 2.5 years because I didn't want to accept that I was at a point where I couldn't work anymore. And it also took a suicidal crisis that landed me on a psych ward for 3 days. So being able to get to that point, even if it took longer than I would have hoped, has been helpful. Being able to apply for disability, follow through on it, being able to go to therapy, and be thankful that I had access to a therapist that I could see. I saw for most of the time that I was, for, the years from my mid 30s until my early 40s, until really about a year ago. I saw the same therapist, great guy. He is a licensed professional counselor, does talk therapy, and he was really willing to be patient with me and to be respectful of what my story was. I saw him twice a week until about the last year when I saw him once a week. And thankfully, I've gotten to a point about a year ago where we looked at each other and said, I don't, we need to have this anymore. So I've ended my therapy successfully because I'm doing well enough in my life and with my mental health issues that I don't need it. The other major thing, major resource and opportunity that I have gladly taken advantage of and has helped me has been work with NAMI, my mental health advocacy work, and specifically the sharing of my story with various audiences per the NAMI program in our own voice and in other presentations, other opportunities that I've had. I'm one of very few male presenters with my NAMI affiliation. There aren't too many men who are willing to get up and share about health struggles. And I always hope to encourage more men to do so, because I know that we are hurting. I know that we are hurting a lot. And many times as men, we feel reluctant to share, to be vulnerable. And a lot of us, this very bad idea in our heads that the topics or the areas of mental health and emotional health are women's spaces, and that they're for women to talk about, but we men are somehow not supposed to. And I wish that more men went against that mindset. I have found it to be so rewarding and so empowering to get up and share my story. I've shared my story again with all kinds of audiences, and have always found it to be uplifting, and always left feeling more hopeful about mental health, about the world, than I did, before. So being part of that, being part of the community of mental health advocacy has been enormously helpful. And the other issue with that is that, especially as someone who's not in work, who's not in the workforce and having a traditional job, it was very important to have a way to still feel productive, to still feel contribute something to society. And that's another way where I was able to build up a separate sense of worth that was different from the one that I was a lawyer. The one that I had as a lawyer was so dependent on our career status. And the one that I have, the one that developed over the years as I've done all these presentations for NAMI and, shared my story, is a different one, perhaps even more powerful, where I know that I'm someone who can do this and I'm someone who can contribute to the world forward. So all of these things have been incredibly helpful in allowing me to cope, allowing me to get by through my worst, and really allowing me to stay hopeful, faith, even with problems that at work caused me a very intense amount of despair. So with that, I will end the second segment, turn it over again for any questions that anyone has for me, questions, comments, you can ask me, or you can put them in the chat. But me.
I'd be happy to ask a question. Thank you so much for this second segment and how authentic your experience is related to us, and authentically and vulnerably and with a lot of courage. The question that I had touched upon the first part of this second segment, where you mentioned the role that our profession plays in our social identity and how deeply held and deeply rooted this work identity can be for a lot of us. I'm wondering, in your resilient journey, how you have experienced opening yourself to other facets of your identity, so that these two, as part as they were of you, were no longer the determining facets of your identity.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's, and again, I think that I did have to experience, I think at some of the most painful points of my depression when I was like, 35, 36, 37, I did kind of have to go through, I guess, what you call an identity crisis, where I did at times despair about who was I if I wasn't a lawyer, what was going to be my future. And a lot of it was, a lot of it was not knowing how the future would actually turn out. And it's easy to look back now and, with the benefit of hindsight and say, oh, well, I applied for disability. I won the disability case. That took over 2 years, more than 2 years from the time that I applied for disability, because of the way it works, the way that disability law works, it has to work its way through the system. So for a long time, I didn't know if I was going to win the disability case. I didn't know that I was going to reach this point. There was a lot that I didn't know. And I had to go through kind of one step at a time, building that new identity. And I think maybe one of the most important lessons I learned is sometimes the way that one gets through that is to just keep going, even without an answer, and just go one step at a time, and not blame yourself for not having an answer for what the long term looks like, because the long term drive you crazy. So yeah, absolutely. I see a comment in the chat. I want to read it. I think there's a good question. Let me just read this. Actually, let me just click on. Okay, so the question is, or the comment, I just want to read this. Thank you for sharing your story. I went through a domestic violence case, and I'm working through PTSD, anxiety, depression from it. Work terminated me, but I also decided not to pursue a wrongful termination case because I'm already dealing with the domestic violence case and don't have energy for another legal case, albeit like a strong one. I did sign a waiving of suing, but not sure if it's really enforceable. Do you know if it's still possible to pursue a disability case in this case? And would it likely be very time and energy consuming? I know this is pretty specific, so we can talk offline if you're up for it, or feel free to answer in session in case it's also helpful for others. First of all, I really appreciate that question. I can share, obviously, unfortunately, can't comment specifically about the legal side, because any case, every case can be different, and I certainly don't want to pretend to have any legal answers. Certainly, I would advise to talk to an attorney that can tell you more specifically. But I can also tell you that I can kind of identify in a different way with that whole situation of leaving a job and more or less feeling forced out because of mental health issues, feeling that it's unfair and, you know, that you were maybe pressured to leave. You know, I've had that happen. In fact, the specifics of me leaving my job were that my FMLA, my paid sick leave ran out, and I was told that I have to go back to the full-time schedule or be terminated. And I said, I can't go back. I have these issues. I want to continue to handle my cases. I think I can continue to do the work that I'm doing as long as I'm shortening my hours. I said, no, we're not going to accommodate that. And I left. So was it right? Was it legal? I don't know. I went on with my life, and I definitely understand that it's many people with mental health issues find themselves in that same situation where they, you know, feel forced out, and there's a lot of injustice about that. I'm also just want to also read another question that I got in the chat. I'm curious about your own relationship with toxic masculinity. That is, do you feel you personally were imbued with some of what I would call the lies of toxic masculinity? And also, if you were subject to those beliefs, was it the sensitive male therapist who helped educate you and to disavow those notions? What have you to discard to the extent that you have to get past the toxic masculinity? That is a very good question. It was therapy. It was my mommy. It was my faith. But to answer the first question, I feel like I picked it up a lot from our culture. I think that it did affect me. I think that I grew up absorbing the messages that a man has to be confident and strong and not show anxiety, not show weakness. And especially with regard to work, that a man has to be successful at work, that's his self-worth, that's his attractiveness to women. And it took me a while, and it took me my depression to really break through that and help me get away from that. So, you know, very, very good questions. Thank you for asking, for writing these in the chat. I want to, in the interest of time, I want to just go on to the last segment. If there are any other questions. Oh, actually, one more chat question. Okay, before I go on, this is another question in the chat. Also, I'm curious, this is from the same person as the last question. Also, I'm curious if you plan to return to paid. If so, would it be to do public speaking or mental health advocacy? If not, does paid work fit into your recovery? As the respectful, self-respecting man that you are, how does paid labor fit in some way? That is an excellent question. And the answer is that I honestly don't know. I have considered that at some point it may be that I'm able to return to paid work, and I haven't ruled that out, but I don't see anything specifically in terms of plan the foreseeable future. I've had to accept that for right now, at least, it's not in the cards for the immediate future. But certainly there are ideas I sometimes have in my head, but they're, you know, more general than not. So great questions. Thank you for asking me you know, thank you for these comments and questions. Let me lead to the last section, which perhaps is the most positive, and I want to be very important with everything I shared to end on a message of hope. So at this point, even with the lack of answers that I have, things like work, paid work, other things long-term, even with, let's just be honest, the way that everyone is imperfectly dealing with the stressors of the pandemic and other stuff going on in the world, I am 100% glad that I'm alive, and I'm happy to be here in this world. And I say that as someone who, at my lowest point, got dangerously close to suicide. I sit here ultimately hopeful about my life, ultimately hopeful about anyone dealing with depression or other serious mental health issues. I have a girlfriend, a wonderful, amazing girlfriend, and we're talking about marriage. I am head over heels in love with her, and she's head over heels in love with me. And it is beyond anything I could have ever imagined I was lonely. I will continue doing this work as far as mental health advocacy. I think it is important for people to speak up about their mental health issues. I think it is absolutely important for men to start vulnerable, to stop being strong and start being real. We have this horrible message that so many men have absorbed, and it all uses this phrase about a quote, real man. A real man does this, a real man does that. A real man is strong and invulnerable and confident, doesn't crack, doesn't show, doesn't have mental health issues, doesn't talk about loneliness or dating anxiety or the dating structure, doesn't do any of that. A real man is just the achiever and the strong one and the workhorse. You know what I say? I say real men are exhausted from the struggles of trying to be a so-called real man. And I want men to be able to talk honestly about their pain. And I want anyone to be able to talk honestly about his or her own pain. We get so many messages that tell us that we shouldn't be, we shouldn't do that. We should somehow be able to handle whatever life throws at us. And I think if there's one thing this pandemic has taught us is that we're a lot less in control than we like to think we are. I want to end by letting everyone know that no matter what you might be dealing with, you deserve to have support in this world. You deserve to have compassion when you're hurting about something. You deserve to have your feelings heard and acknowledged. So with that being said, I finish my presentation, and with the remaining time, I want to just let anyone ask any questions that they have for me, or any comments about anything that I've shared. And I really appreciate this time to share my story and for all of you listening to me. So thank you. Any last questions. In a great audience, by the way.
I have a question. So it seems like there's a lot of self-assessment that came with this journey. First like identifying when you were like sad versus crossing over into the territory of depression, and then like as your therapy progressed, like recognizing when you didn't need it anymore. So I guess this is kind of an abstract question, but how do you know? How did you know? Like, for example, like when you're there, when you no longer needed therapy, like what were some of the like internal things you looked for? What were some of the thought processes, or how did you come to that conclusion?
Very good question. I actually talked it over with my therapist. This was in the months leading up to the decision that I think we both made. I was kind of leaning toward it, and he was supporting it because I think he knew that I was reaching my end point with therapy, and it was. I felt like we talked it over, and we both concluded that we had talked over everything that we could in therapy. Therapy had every positive effect that it could have on me, and that there was no more continued need for it. Was the goal of therapy to make everything 100% perfect? Of course not. But in the words to use a phrase that NAMI will often use, I am living well with mental illness. I can't say that my mental health issues are 100% gone, that I don't struggle ever with anything. But here I am. I have a great relationship. I get up every day. I'm functional within the context of what I can manage. I have friends. I exercise. I walk. I enjoy things. I have meaningful work that may not be paid, but in the context of mental health advocacy, I'm connected to various communities. And so by any objective measurement, I'm doing as well in my life as I can. And I think from that I concluded, and my therapist concluded, that therapy was no longer indicated, as they say. So very good question. Let me look at the chats because I feel I sense that question, did you find any resources or support from chronic health illness groups? Very good question. I explored those. I actually, at one point, did try to explore support groups for people with depression, and it didn't seem to be my thing. I know actually NAMI offers those. I also looked at other organizations or other groups that offer that, but I didn't really feel like I connected. Any other last question, comments?
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Yep.
I'm curious. I'm a therapist, and I'm curious how much of your therapy uh, had to do with anger work or about anger.
That is an excellent question. I definitely struggled with anger, and I struggled with it relating to certain things that I had to kind of get past, as far as family, as far as my father that I had been long estranged from because of addiction issues. So there were familial issues that I had to confront. There were also a lot of issues relating to identity and masculinity, my frustration with the dating culture. So there was a lot of anger that I think that I had to sort through and process, and I think that was a lot of the therapy.
Good. Good. Thanks a lot. Thank you for speaking with us. Appreciate hearing your story.
Absolutely.
Well.
Oh, I see something else in the chat. When did the term, this is a question, when did the toxic masculinity appear to you and in the media / culture? Very good question. I can't totally remember. I feel like I feel like I only became aware of it, if I can remember, maybe in the last 5 years or so. So maybe I I don't was thinking about it too much like 10 or 20 years ago. Someone wrote, I became aware of toxic masculinity with the rise of the Me Too movement. A very important comment. One of the things, I have to say this, one of the things I really regret about when the phrase or the term toxic masculinity is discussed is that a lot of people have this perception, unfortunately, that when a subject of toxic masculinity comes up, that it's about bashing men. And I just don't see it that way. If anything, I think that discussing toxic masculinity is really about protecting men from taking on too much, taking on things that are just unreasonable, flawed. So, you know, I know we're probably at our time, but I did want to give any last chance for questions.
Did you have a question, Ghost?
Not really a question, just to say thank you to him because I like so much. Yes, I mean, this is very, very enlightening, and really appreciate your being open about it, because many people are not, like you said, you are one of the few lone voices of male voices with NAMI. So the fact that you even want to use us, and we share far and wide, people go to our website to listen. They don't check in because they know that ultimately we'll put it on our website. So what you did today is really going to go for us. Thank you.
I really appreciate that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much, Phil, for presenting today and for being so vulnerable with us and for answering such intimate questions. I'm really excited that we were able to have an open and honest and vulnerable discussion, an intimate discussion tonight. And I'm hoping that it will help someone who is here now or maybe will be watching in the recording in the future. So I just want to thank you and thank everyone for coming and for, as Bill said, for showing interest in the subject matter, because I think that the intersection of gender does impact how these mental health issues manifest, and being male, I think, comes with its own barriers, and especially with depression and discussing emotions and being vulnerable. So thank you so much to everyone.